time to help me with my art history project?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
What's
sure.
it on?
So my teacher gave us this quote from Picasso.
I love Picasso.
Really? Me too!
Yeah, you
And
know
we're supposed-
analytic cubism? Do you know about that, Brad?
Of course I
Are
do.
you sure?
I'm positive.
Okay. Anyway.
So we're supposed to show how modern and traditional artists modify similar subjects in order to conform to the status quo of the era.
We have some ideas.
Yes, I do.
This is what you do.
Da 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 da.
Kara Walker's Darkytown Rebellion is made of over a dozen silhouettes of characters in a gruesome scene. One figure stands upright over his severed limb with bones protruding from his hips. A woman with a voluminous hoop skirt may be attacking a smaller figure on its back, perhaps a baby, with a long plunger-like instrument. The color projections with psychedelic music heighten the surreality of the scene. Silhouettes began as an art form in the 16th century in Europe and became a suitable hobby for ladies and an economical alternative to painted miniatures. Except for the outline of a forehead, nose, lips, and chin, all the subject's facial details are lost in a silhouette, thus reducing the sitters to a few personal characteristics. In Walker's hands, the silhouettes became a tool for exploring racial identification. The silhouettes allow for the figures to just represent people without identifying their race, so it forces viewers to ask themselves why race should deem whether the actions of a person are good or bad. Walker forces viewers to ask themselves why whenever blacks fight or rebel, it is seen and portrayed as being barbaric. However, when whites fight for what they believe, it is seen as heroic and brave. This heroism is seen in Delacroix's Liberty Leading the People. Delacroix paints the Baroque painting of the Revolution of 1830 in France and depicts liberty as both an allegorical goddess figure and a robust woman of the people. Liberty embodies the pride the French felt when they fought the monarchy and shows their inspiration to rebel against the government. There are dead members from both sides in the foreground. The figure lying dead on the bottom left shows the government would go into the homes of those who opposed them, beat them to death, and drag them out of their beds onto the streets to remind the townspeople of the power the government held. Although gruesome killings are illustrated in this painting, the allegorical figure of liberty shows French pride and motivation, whereas in Darkytown Rebellion, the figures are shown committing horrific murders without an incentive. Liberty Leading the People shows how the people were fighting for a cause, and it inspired nationalism and revolution and pride. But in Darkytown Rebellion, Walker shows the viewers everything that is left out in paintings such as that of Delacroix. The massacres and the murders committed are not shown in detail and don't represent the minorities.
Titian's Venus of Urbino and Kiki Smith's Lying with the Wolf both consist of nude women. However, both paintings present vastly different images of women. The Venus of Urbino was created in the Renaissance, a time when women were denied all political rights and considered legally subject to their husbands. Women were not allowed to live independently and often were viewed as objects belonging to men. Meanwhile, Lying with the Wolf was created in 2001. In today's modern age, the feminist movement has made significant gains. Women can now vote, live alone, and do many of the things that men can. Kiki Smith emphasizes this new modern and more powerful role of woman in Lying with the Wolf. In the Venus of Urbino, Titian uses the color red in order to draw the viewer's eyes across the entire painting. From the bedspread to the roses in the woman's hand to the maid's skirt, the color red allows the painting to be balanced. However, in Lying with the Wolf, the two subjects are in the center of the paper. This only allows the viewer's eyes to go to one point on the piece, which is right in the middle. The piece has no vibrant colors, which makes the audience truly think about the underlying message within the piece, which is that man and animal are equal, or more specifically, woman and animal are equal. The Venus of Urbino shows a nude young woman who is lounging on a bed in a Renaissance palace, who stares straight at the viewer. There is a child and a maid standing in the background, and a dog lies at the bottom of the bed that the woman is laying on. Lying with the Wolf shows a female who is nude reclining alongside a wolf in an intimate way. Smith tried to erase the line that separates man and animal, and she did this by having the woman and wolf come together in an embrace that shows that there is an ambiance of comfort within the piece. Both influences for this piece are very different. The Venus of Urbino was Italian and was made in order to celebrate a wedding. Meanwhile, Lying with the Wolf was influenced by Asian art and was made in order to show how man and animal are one and in the same, in order to emphasize the mysticism and feral power of woman. The Venus of Urbino's artist, Titian, puts all of the beauty of the piece into the woman's body. In this piece, it's more about how the figures within the piece look, more than what they symbolize. However, this is completely the opposite within Lying with the Wolf. Lying with the Wolf focuses more on the beauty, focuses less on the beauty, with the underlying message rather than the subjects themselves. The beauty within this piece stems from the nature and balance of equality that the artist wanted to highlight.
Two different pieces of art, one contemporary and one traditional, that depict an underlying theme but have radically different messages behind them, are Spaniard and Indian Produce a Mestizo, which is attributed to Juan Rodriguez Juarez, which is oil on canvas made in 1715, versus Trade, or Gifts for Trading Land with White People, by Juan Quick to See Smith, made in 1992, which is oil and mixed media on canvas. The genre of painting of Spaniard and Indian Produce a Mestizo is known as Pinturas de Castas, or cast paintings, and these attempt to capture reality, yet they are largely fictitious. Typically, casta paintings display a mother, father, and a child, and sometimes two. This family model is possibly based on depictions of the Holy Family showing the Virgin Mary, Saint Joseph, and Christ as a child. This specific painting depicts a mother and father with two children, one of whom is a servant carrying the couple's baby. The indigenous mother, dressed in a huipil, which is a traditional woman's garment worn by indigenous women from central Mexico, with lace sleeves and wearing jewelry, turns to look at her husband as she gestures towards the child. Her husband, who wears French-style European clothing, including a powdered wig, gazes down at the child with his hand resting on the child. The young servant looks upwards to the father. The father's hand is resting on the child's head, which is a sign of affection. The family appears calm and harmonious, even loving. Existing evidence suggests that some of these casta series were commissioned by viceroys, or the stand-in for the Spanish king in the Americas, who brought some casta series to Spain upon their return. Other series were commissioned for important administrators. Because casta paintings reflect increasing social anxieties about ethnic mixing, it is possible that elites who claim to be of pure blood, and who likely found the dilution of pure bloodedness alarming, were among those individuals who commissioned these type of paintings. In contrast, Trade, or Gifts for Trading Land with White People, was created as a response to the 500th anniversary of Christopher Columbus's arrival in North America in 1992. Trade references the role of trade goods in allegorical stories, such as the acquisition of the island of Manhattan by Dutch colonists in 1626 from unnamed Native Americans in exchange for goods worth around $24. This story has become part of American folklore, suggesting that Native Americans had been lured off their lands by inexpensive trade goods. The misunderstanding between the native and non-native worlds, especially in terms of private ownership of land, is what underlies the message of trade. For Trade, Smith layered images, paint, and objects on the surface of the canvas, suggesting layers of history and complexity. It's divided into 3 large panels, and the triptych arrangement is similar to that of a medieval altarpiece. Smith covered the canvas in collage with newspaper articles about native life cut from her tribal paper, photos, comics, tobacco and gum wrappers, fruit carton labels, ads, and pages from comic books, which all depict stereotypical images of Native Americans. She mixed the collage text with photos of deer, buffalo, and native men in a historical dress holding pipes with feathers in their hair. She also applied blocks of white, yellow, and green, and especially red paint over the layer of the materials. The color red had multiple meanings for Smith, referring to her native heritage, as well as to blood, warfare, anger, and sacrifice. With the emphasis on prominent brushstrokes and the dripping blocks of paint, Smith refers to the abstract expressionist movement from the 1940s and 50s, with raw brushstrokes describing deep emotions and social chaos. The canoe depicted also suggests the possibility of trade and cultural connections, but the empty canoe is stuck and unable to move. Smith offers these cheap goods in exchange for the lands that were lost, which reverses the historical sale of land for trinkets. These items also serve as reminders of how native life had been commodified, turning native cultural objects into cheap items sold without a true understanding of what their original meanings were. Trade, a contemporary piece of art, stands in contrast to the older painting of Spaniard and Mestizo Produce a Child. Though they both are about the idea of colonization and integration of ethnicities, Trade depicts it in a much more negative light. At the time when the Spaniard and Indian Produce Mestizo was created, there didn't seem to be anything wrong with what the Europeans were doing to the colonists, and the painting depicts a harmonious relationship between the two. However, Trade, which is a far more contemporary piece, depicts how the Native Americans were treated as inferior and how they were wronged by the colonists. Both pieces of art are delivering different messages about the relationships between the colonists and the natives, and this is due to the time period both were made in.
The swings at the time of and after Fragonard are also interesting to compare. The earlier swing by Honore Fragonard is a Rococo-style piece showing the mischievous nature of a young woman as she playfully tosses a slipper to her hidden lover, who lies just beyond the line of sight of the man who pushes her on a red velvet swing. Not only is this woman in a pink, frivolous dress, she also the first figure that grabs the attention of the viewer. It also marks one of the first changes made by the artist Yinka Schonibert in his later installation criticizing the swing. With the swing by Yinka Schonibert, the fingers delicately grasp the thickly coiled rope of the swing suspended mid-flight, similar to Fragonard's earlier depiction. However, Schonibert chose to make note of the African culture by changing the fabric type of the young woman's dress. Schonibert presents his life-size female mannequin flirtatiously as she kicks up her left foot, projecting her slipper into the air, where it hovers above a tangle of branches as she is wearing a Dutch tourist fabric that would have been commonly seen in the African culture. This contrasts from Fragonard, who chose to comment on the status quo in his error by creating a piece that looked light and innocent upon first glance, as it appears to simply be showing a young aristocratic woman who is being pushed on a swing by her lover. Upon further examination, the viewer would also realize that there are two men that are admiring this young woman, one of which is hidden in the thorny bushes where he cannot be seen, and is waiting as he has a questionable view of what lies beyond the pink of the young woman's dress, rather than showing a heavy image that might overwhelm the viewer, as could be considered when noticing that the female in Schonibert's recreation is lacking a head meant as a nod towards the use of the guillotine that would have been increasingly common in the French justice system. Therefore, the viewer is shown the contrast of a light, more freely flowing image of how the times were interpreted in a way that emphasized the aspect of pleasure for the aristocracy, rather than focusing on those darker images and emphasizing the scandal of this young woman as she convinces the older man to push her on the swing while her lover is waiting in the overgrown bushes. This shows contrast with Schonibert's depiction, as the viewer is shown the actions of that era in a much darker light. The young woman in Schonibert's representation is lacking the head, as aforesaid, and considering the swing was meant to show the frivolity of pre-revolutionary France, the swing after Fragonard appears to place more focus on the darkness of what was to come with the revolution. The young woman in Schonibert's depiction is lacking a head, which is meant as a nod towards guillotine, that coincidentally was more common for those who showed opposition through the aristocracy. Considering that the swing after Fragonard is a three-dimensional recreation of the Rococo painting, made long after the original piece from 1767, the viewer can see how Schonibert criticizes the frivolous action of this young woman. while Fragonard's piece shows how the aristocracy looked beyond those questionable moments, as could be seen by the putti, by the younger man, hidden in the bushes, as he almost appears to be shushing the audience to tell the viewer not to allow the knowledge of the second man's presence to be shared with the older lover, although it is obvious that he is mischievously glancing up the layers of her dress to catch a glimpse of what lies beneath. By drawing our attention to questions of excess, class, and morality that were raised by revolutionaries 2 centuries ago, Schonibert invites the viewer to also consider the increasing disparity between economic classes today, especially alongside the growing culture of paranoia, terror, and xenophobia in global politics since 9/11. As a British-born Nigerian, raised between Lagos and London, Schonibert is especially perceptive to the ways in which issues of access, nationalism, and belonging have possessed a clear presence in modern European history, particularly with regards to the United Kingdom and its relationship to its former colonies. Here's where the specific fabrics that Schonibert utilizes become more relevant, as their symbolism is steeped in histories of cultural appropriation, imperialism, and power. Though tailored in the fashion of 18th century French aristocratic style, which was similar to the style depicted by Fragonard, the costume that is modeled by Schonibert's protagonist has been sewn from colorful and abstractly patterned fabrics with quite different origins. The bright golds, reds, and blues arranged in geometric motifs across her ruffled skirt are typical of the African Dutch wax fabrics that Schonibert has famously used to adorn his pieces. While these fabrics have come to signify African identity today, the patterns in Dutch wax fabrics were originally based on motifs found in Indonesian batiks and were manufactured in England and Holland in the 19th century. Predictably, the European imitations did not prove adequate when sold in South Asian markets. So, the Dutch chose to manufacture these marketed textiles to their West African colonies, where they have since been integrated into the local visual culture. Now, this begs the question of what Schonibert meant to communicate while bringing together these African textiles with Fragonard's Rococo images. In imagining this particular moment in European history, Schonibert wishes to forge connections between imperialism, the aristocracy, and the colonized wealthy class. In the swing after Fragonard, which is loaded with references to the French Revolution, the Age of Enlightenment, and colonial expansion into Africa, Schonibert asks us to consider how a simple act of leisure can be so controversial, only to further the viewer's understanding of how the perception of reality is relative based on what aspects are focused on when creating art. In this, other works, Schonibert chooses stories including biographies, world events, and works of art, which are already effective allegories concerning race, class, and corruption and greed, calling our attention to some of the darker moments in Western history. However, his use of Dutch wax fabric with his origins and its misleading aesthetic identity serve as a reminder that history and truth are also themselves constructions.
Another 2 pieces of art that show 2 different time periods are the statues of votive figures from the Square Temple at Oshuna, or modern Talismar, Iraq, which was created in 2700 BCE out of gypsum inlaid with shell and black limestone, in comparison to the electronic superhighway created by Nam June Paik in 1995, which is a mixed media installation. The votive figures were found under a temple, and these wide-eyed, attentive figures were created to be attentive towards God. They look as if they are continuously attentive, and their sole purpose is to be devoted to God. There is also a sense of mortality with these figures. Their hair comes down and frames their ears, and their hands are clasped in front of them, and their eyes are huge, filled with devotion. This is different from Egyptian art because it shows worshippers and not kings. They are not meant to be portraits of a specific person, but a symbol of the person. Their clasped hands make them seem humble. They also have geometric patterning rather than naturalistic, because a naturalistic figure might give the idea of someone just passing through and visiting, but the static, frontal, symmetrical figure gives a sense of timelessness, someone who is forever praying to God. In the time that the electronic superhighways created, media technologies would become increasingly prevalent in American society and used to address pressing social problems such as segregation, the modernization of the economy, and environmental pollution. Paik forecasted the emergence of what he called a broadband communication network or electronic superhighway. In the 1960s, he was one of the very first people to use televisual technologies as an artistic medium, earning him the title of Father of Video Art. For Paik and other adopters of video, this new artistic medium was well suited to the speed of the increasing electronic modern lives of people. It allowed artists to create moving images more quickly than recording on film, and people could see themselves live on a TV screen and even interact with their own TV image in a process known as feedback. Paik, placing over 300 TV screens into the overall formation of a map of the United States outlined in colored neon lights. Roughly 40 feet long and 15 feet high, the work was a monumental record of the physical and also cultural components of America. Within each state, the screens display video clips that resonate with the state's own unique popular culture. The states are firmly defined, but also linked by the network of neon lights, which resembles the network of interstate superhighways that economically and culturally unified the continental U.S. in the 1950s. However, while the highways facilitated the transportation of people and goods from coast to coast, the neon light suggests that what unifies us now is not so much transportation, but electronic communication. While Paik's work is generally described as celebrating the fact that the electronic superhighway allows us to communicate with and understand each other across traditional boundaries, this particular work can also be read as posing some difficult questions about how that technology is impacting culture. The votive figures describe a time period where people solely worshiped God, and that was what society was based off of. However, the time period of the electronic superhighway displays a very different time. It shows a time of dominance by technology. These two pieces of art depict the difference in what dominated society at the time they were made and what people were devoted to. One time was heavily religious, while the other was ridden by new technologies.
And that's how artists in the modern and traditional eras manipulated their works to comment on the status quo of the society in that time. Wow, the perception of reality truly is relative. So, Miss Claudia, how did I do?
A+.